Imagine the scenario that you've been tasked with writing an essay by one of your teachers. You go to start that essay with a blank, fresh Google Doc, and that cursor blinks, 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 and it taunts you to write your first sentence. And you don't know how to start that first sentence. Where do I even begin? How do I make an attention grabbing first sentence? All too often, we've been in that scenario with how do I even begin my essay? So what this video shows is that you should reverse that idea of I need to write my introduction later, right? You should not start with introduction. So this is a key idea of this video about introduction to conclusion and conclusions by Mr. Scoba here. So start with your thesis and start with the body paragraphs and the evidence that you need to have. You've done that now. And so now what you're doing is writing the introduction, because how can you introduce something you haven't written yet, right? That seems counterintuitive, but all too often we're trying to start with the introduction. So forever now, when you have an essay to write, begin by writing your body paragraphs first. Get those ideas out there so that way you can go back and introduce them. For example, my introductory video is the last thing I made. I'm recording this now. I haven't recorded it yet. How can I introduce the whole module and say, here's what's in store without having made that first? So here's what goes into a good introduction and conclusion. So the purpose of the introduction paragraph is to attract the audience to writing. That's that challenge that we have, is how do I get the audience's attention in that first paragraph? It's also to clarify the main ideas, right? That thesis idea that you're putting out there. It's also going to introduce the author and the main work that you're discussing. So Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities for this year. And it's clarifying the presentation of your ideas. What literary devices are you exploring? What examples will you explore? And it consists of the funnel. And a lot of you are familiar with this funnel introduction paragraph from last year. And here's this visual representation of this. And we'll go over each component, but you start with your general statement and you go all the way down to your thesis and you funnel down to this, right? You have the thesis statement, and so you should kind of work your way back up to the general statement. So this last general statement is what you make first. So what I want to explain as you work your way up, right? So that first thing was your thesis. The next thing above that is the background information. And the background information should be the characters, the plot, or the events you're exploring in the essay. It should not be a summary of the novel, and it should not cover, events or characters you're not even talking about. If you're dealing with Lucy or Dr. Manette, don't talk about the Defarges, right? We don't need that information. So just give us the information and the ideas of the examples you're presenting. You also want to, above that, introduce the author. So include the author's full name, the title of the book, have that in italics, and then that way you don't have to have the book title in your thesis statement. It's already been introduced. After this point, you can talk about what I just said, have the characters and the plot of the novel you'll be analyzing. Above that, you have linking statements between the author and the background information you're going to provide with that general statement. So you have these links between the two. And then that first sentence, it should be a general statement. But it shouldn't be general enough that you're referencing the entirety of history or throughout literature. Authors use symbolism. Yes, they do, but that's way too broad of a general statement. You should have a general statement that is somehow connected to the point of your thesis. And then that way you can then link it with sentences down to your author, down to the thesis that you eventually have with the funnel introduction. Right. The general statement grabs the reader's attention. It should be a quote or rhetorical question, a statement, a statistic. Imagine, if you will, a scenario like I just opened with. So it somehow attracts the audience to read it. It also addresses the prop that you're talking about, the main idea that's generated. And it mentions possibly the concepts you're going to explore with this. So it does a lot, but it does just enough to get into the rest of the introduction. So here's an example introduction. I'm not going to read it. You can read it after this video, but it does follow that funnel introductory paragraph. Now, the conclusion, it reverses the funnel. So you restate the thesis in a different way, and then it funnels back out to a general statement. So you have your thesis, you rephrase your arguments that you made about your examples to remind the reader of what you talked about, and then transition down to that broader statement you want to make. So this is more specific to the novel. This is the broader topic you're trying to make. So that's the reverse funnel introduction, or reverse funnel conclusion. And the purpose is to remind the reader, what did you talk about? It gives insight into what people are reading about your essay. And it shouldn't introduce new ideas. There's one example essay, I think it's the B- essay, where they added new ideas in the conclusion. And I went, wait a minute, you didn't talk about those examples. You didn't talk about those analysis that you just talked about in the conclusion. So that was totally off base with the conclusion because they weren't summarizing their main points. They tried to introduce things in the last minute. It shouldn't be that. It should be, here's what I talked about. So those are my notes and things to talk about and analyze when you get into your introduction and conclusion. Best of luck. You're almost there. Once you're done, it's just kind of fine tuning. Again, let me know if you have any questions along the way. Take care, folks.